The phone call came on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. Uncle Frank was gone, the world tilted on its axis. He was my anchor, the only one who ever truly saw me. While they saw a wallet, I saw the man who taught me to fish. I held his hand through the chemo. I read to him when he was too weak to hold the book himself. They didn't call to grieve, they called to ask about his will. The day after he died, they summoned me. It wasn't a house of mourning, it was a crime scene. Drawers gutted, silver stolen, hands grabbing before he was even cold. It wasn't a house of mourning, it was a crime scene. Drawers gutted, silver stolen, hands grabbing before he was even cold. They saw me as the servant, the foolish, emotional one to clean the mess while they pocketed the profit. In that moment, a plan was born. Dark, terrible, perfect. The grief was a physical ache, a heavy stone lodged beneath my ribs. But the next morning, I moved with a purpose I hadn't felt in years. I bought small wireless cameras. My hands didn't shake. The sorrow was there, sealed in ice. I drove back to Uncle Frank's house. It was silent, empty, still wounded by what they'd done. His scent still lingered in the air, and it made my eyes burn. I was setting a trap for my own blood. It should have horrified me. It felt like justice. One watched from the bookshelf, another from the curtain rod. A third faced the dining room table. This house was now a gallery of their true character, and I was the curator. They returned the next day, just as I knew they would. I stood in the kitchen, pretending to sort through dusty pots. My phone was already open to the live feed. My heart pounded violently against my ribs. On the screen, I watched the sequel to their disgusting play. It was even pettier than the first act.
Mom promised me this vase! You're a liar!
I watched Uncle Bob on his knees, unscrewing crystal doorknobs, dropping them into his toolbox with dull clanks. Then I heard my name. Where's Amanda? She should have cleaned this mess by now. She's probably off crying, always too sensitive, too attached. They laughed, cold and hollow. I stood there trembling with white-hot rage and made sure the microphone captured every syllable. I had it all on record. The day of the memorial dawned bright and cheerful. A cruel joke of a day. The little white church was packed. Uncle Frank had been a pillar of this community. There they sat in the front pews, dressed in black, wearing masks of perfect, practiced grief. "You were his favorite, Amanda," Aunt Carol said, dabbing a perfectly dry eye. I nodded meekly. "I've prepared a small slideshow," I told her. A tribute. I spent the night editing. No music, no dramatic text. The raw footage was condemnation enough. I nodded meekly. "I've prepared a small slideshow," I told her. A tribute. They were about to learn the price of betrayal is a public reckoning, and I was their bill collector. The pastor finished his kind words. The air was thick with sorrow. Then it was my turn. I walked to the pulpit, my legs feeling like they belonged to someone else. Uncle Frank was a man who believed in honesty. He believed in family, in doing the right thing. I saw my aunts and uncles nod slightly, their masks of grief perfectly in place. He would have been heartbroken to see what happened in his home after he left us. A ripple of confusion moved through the church. Aunt Carol shot me a sharp warning look. So I made a tribute, to show you all what true family looks like. Their voices filled the church. The footage showed Sarah stealing. I watched their masks shatter into terror and shame. Pandemonium. The screen showed Uncle Bob prying a painting off the wall with a crowbar. He leaped to his feet, face burning purple. "Turn that off! Amanda, shut it off right now!" But no one moved. They were frozen, hypnotized by the train wreck unfolding before them. The footage kept playing, a relentless parade of greed and cruelty. Whispers turned to angry shouts. "I can't believe it. They're animals." My aunts were sobbing now, real tears, trying to hide their faces. There was nowhere to hide. The projector light was merciless, exposing every sin. I finally turned to see the power of it. I said nothing. I didn't need to. The evidence thundered for me. The revenge now lived in the room. I walked out of the church, the heavy door muting the chaos behind me. The sunlight was blinding. Their disgrace faded into simple mourning sounds. I walked out of the church, the heavy door muting the chaos behind me. I got into my car and drove away, not once looking back. I went to his house one last time. It was still a disaster, but the energy had changed. The war wasn't over. There would be backlash. But the decisive battle was mine. I looked at a photograph of us laughing, his arm around my shoulders. For the first time since he died, I smiled. I fought for him. I was his voice. And I won. The silence outside the church felt thick and heavy. I stood on the steps and simply breathed. My phone began vibrating incessantly in my purse, an angry, buzzing thing. I didn't need to look. I could hear their words. "You've destroyed us. We'll sue you." With a calm that felt strange and powerful, I held the button until the screen went black. The silence returned, absolute. I walked to my car and drove away without looking back. I didn't go home. I drove to the lake, to Uncle Frank's spot. I finally let the tears come, not regret, but release. A poison leaving my body. The weight was gone. The anger burned to ashes. I was light. I was free. By Monday, the digital fallout was a tsunami crashing over my family's carefully constructed lives. Mrs. Gable from the bakery called. Lisa was fired. They couldn't trust someone with questionable morals. Then a text from Mike at the hardware store. Bob lost the Johnson renovation. His money was too dirty. The town Frank loved became a wall of judgment, protecting his memory by shunning his betrayers. My phone buzzed again. Aunt Carol. A colder part of me needed to hear the wreckage.
You have to fix this. Tell them it was a mistake. They're spitting when I walk by.
The only misunderstanding, Carol, was believing you could get away with it. I just turned on the lights. "You've ruined us," she whispered. "No. You did that yourselves. I only held up the mirror." Their formal response arrived Wednesday, in a thick envelope delivered by a stone-faced process server. My hands were perfectly steady as I sliced it open. They were suing me for defamation, emotional distress, invasion of privacy, demanding apology and money. A cold, mirthless laugh escaped me. Their arrogance was breathtaking. I felt no panic, only clarity. I drove straight to Evelyn's office. She read it carefully. A slow, predatory smile spread across her face. Her response was surgical. Truth as defense, their own footage as evidence, legal fees promised. Signing my name felt like wielding a scalpel. They tried to bludgeon me. I dissected them with the law. With the legal threat looming, I felt a renewed purpose to finish clearing out Uncle Frank's house. In the garage, the air thick with dust and motor oil, I moved a heavy tarp and knocked against something solid. I knelt down and found a sturdy, dust-caked lockbox tucked deep behind some rusty tools. I remembered the small, tarnished key Frank called his skeleton key and fitted it into the lock. It turned with a heavy, satisfying click. Inside were letters and a single legal document. The letters, written in their familiar, demanding scripts, chronicled their bottomless greed. Then I picked up the document, a will revoking all previous versions and leaving everything to me. He knew, he had always known, and in the end he chose me, not out of pity, but recognition. I practically ran back to Evelyn's office, the new will clutched in my hand like a sacred text. I slid it across her desk, my heart pounding a wild, triumphant rhythm. She read it slowly, her eyebrows rising higher with each passing paragraph. When she finished, she looked up at me, her expression one of pure, unadulterated victory. "This isn't just a new piece of evidence. This is the entire game board, flipped over." We filed it with the probate court that very afternoon. The news acted like a bucket of ice water on their lawsuit. Their legal challenge, built on the shaky foundation of the old will, collapsed into dust overnight. They had no claim. The hunters had been transformed into paupers, their greed now quantified at a value of $1 single. The final probate meeting was held in a sterile beige conference room that smelled of lemon-scented cleaner and quiet despair. My aunts and uncles filed in, their postures slumped, their faces pale and hollowed out. They looked like ghosts of the people I had known. all their bluster and arrogance drained away.
The family lawyer read the new will aloudly in a dry, monotonous voice.
When he reached the clause about the $1 inheritance, a strangled, pathetic sound escaped Aunt Carol's lips. There were no more outbursts, just the heavy, crushing finality of their own disgrace. As the meeting adjourned, they shuffled out of the room like prisoners leaving a courtroom, broken by a sentence they never saw coming. I remained seated. It was over, truly, completely over. With the house now legally and irrevocably mine, I moved into Seoul. It was time for a clean break, a severance from the physical location of so much pain. But the money from the sale felt different from the rest of the inheritance. It felt tarnished, stained by the bitter fight it had inspired. And so I established the Franklin Miller Fund for Second Chances, a small local grant program. It was designed to do quietly what Frank had always done: help people facing a temporary, devastating crisis. The first grant went to old Mr. Henderson, Frank's widowed neighbor, who was on the verge of losing his home. When I called to tell him, he broke down in tears of relief, his gratitude so raw and genuine it brought tears to my own eyes. That moment, that human connection, was the true inheritance. A year to the day after the memorial service, I found myself back at the lake. I sat on the pier not to cry, but to think, to take stock of the twisted, painful path that had led me here, that set out to shame my family, and I had succeeded beyond my darkest imaginings. But in doing so, I had also, unexpectedly, freed myself. The revenge was complete, but it wasn't the end of my story. It was the painful, violent, necessary beginning. Transformed me the destructive and ultimately liberating power of unvarnished truth. I turned my back on the lake and walked toward my car. I was the architect of my future, and my foundation, forged in fire and hardened by truth, was solid rock. The padded envelope, devoid of a return address, appeared in my mailbox. Inside, nestled in plain white tissue paper, was my grandmother's silver locket. The very one time of love. This wasn't just a piece of jewelry, it was a confession. A stolen artifact returned to its rightful heir. It was a silent, tangible apology from someone too ashamed to attach their name to it. I didn't know if it was Sarah's conscience had compelled one of them to send it. In the end, it didn't matter. I opened the tiny clasp. A young mahove. I closed it gently and placed it back in its tissue paper. I wouldn't wear it. It was an ending. And I was finally ready to accept it. Its presence, however, didn't bring peace so much as a restless energy. The inheritance money felt heavy, tainted by the battle it had fueled. I couldn't build a new life on a foundation of spite. Sitting in the quiet of my apartment, I made a decision that felt both terrifying and right. College. In chaos. I was a decade older than most students. But in that anonymity, I found a strange freedom. Here, I wasn't the niece who exposed her family or Frank's heir. I was just Amanda, a student with a backpack and a notebook. My identity was no longer a cage come in the fractions. But in that anonymity, I found a strange freedom. Here, I wasn't the niece who exposed her family or Frank's heir. I was just Amanda. Now, planted in the fresh soil of this new purpose, I was determined to grow toward the light, away from the darkness of what had been. The call from my mother came on a rainy evening, the kind that made the world feel soft and muted. Amanda, your father and I saw the article about the grant fund, the one you started for Frank. She paused. We were cowards. The words, so long ding a sir victory. The little girl who had stood alone for so long finally felt seen. Thank you for telling me, Mom, my own voice thick with an emotion I couldn't name. It wasn't forgiveness, that would be a longer journey, but it was a start. A single fragile thread thrown across a great chasm. Some bridges I was beginning to understand could be rebuilt, not all at once, but one painful, honest plank at a time. I was in the university library, immersed in a dense chapter on trauma-informed care. We hadn't exchanged a word since we were teenagers. I know I have no right. I just said you it began. She wrote that the footage from the memorial had acted like a bomb, shattering the curated family narrative she'd always accepted. She was in therapy now, she confessed, trying to dissect the culture of entitlement that had rotted their family from the inside out. It was the truth, and it was the shock to the system we all desperately needed. It forced me to open my eyes. So in a messed up way, thank you, I read her words, this raw confession from the next generation, and felt the world shift on its axis. My revenge had been an act of personal religious fury, unlocking a prison door for someone else. And in just great, I had pawned my family. It had also sent I never knew existed. The official period of letter from the probate court arrives. The estate was closed. The rest of the paperwork, it was done. With the last to process the $1 payments. She emailed me copies of the checks, a bizarre and sobering gallery of my family's downfall. This wasn't about the money, it was about value. Frank had assigned them a value, and the cold, empty partial. The account, in every sense of the word, was settled. A deep, permanent silence descended upon my life. The battle was Olin's. The quiet was buried with her Elise in a new, unfamiliar territory to navigate. I never shared my story, but I listened closely to theirs. They spoke of being belittled, controlled, and betrayed by the ones who promised love. In their voices, I heard echoes of my own pain. Helping them find footing and reclaim their agency strengthened my own. I used what I was learning, offering practical tools and steady presence. Maria once told me I seemed calm, like someone rebuilt after a hurricane. I was no longer the storm's victim, I was the architect of something strong and entirely my own. I used a portion of the inheritance as a down payment on something steady and real. Not a flashy dream house, but a solid 2-bedroom bungalow with a porch and sunlit garden. The day I signed the papers and held the keys, something shifted inside me. This space was mine, untouched by ghosts or memories of greed and betrayal. The first night, I sat on the empty floor and felt a profound, peaceful silence. I had chosen every detail, every corner, every breath this home would hold. I hung one picture, Frank and me laughing on the pier, love frozen in time. He was the root, and here in this clean soil, I was finally growing free. At the Saturday farmer's market, surrounded by color and scent, I turned a corner. And there she was, Aunt Carol, standing directly in front of me. We froze, a lifetime of history and hurt passing between us in silence. The anger was gone, replaced by a weary sadness etched into her posture. The crowd flowed around us like a river parting around forgotten statues. She spoke softly, mentioning the gardenias blooming beautifully this season. It was a fragile peace offering, a memory untouched by greed or bitterness. I answered just as quietly, my voice empty of malice, simply agreeing. It wasn't forgiveness or reconciliation, but it was something quieter. It was a ceasefire, sometimes the deepest peace we ever truly achieve. Today, I stood in a black cap and gown, my master's hood resting on my shoulders. The auditorium roared with applause, and I saw my parents standing, proud and unwavering. What began in grief and betrayal had carried me to this triumph. I navigated the darkness not with cruelty, but with the fierce light of truth. I lost the family I was born into, but found someone stronger in the ashes. I found my voice, my calling, and a new definition of family. It was built on choice and respect, not obligation or crumbling foundations. The revenge was a closed chapter, a fire that cleared space for growth. As I moved my tassel, I wasn't just accepting a diploma. I was accepting my future, defined entirely on my own terms. His legacy was never money or property, but the courage to choose what's right. The story of anger ended. The legacy of love begins now, and I am its author. Months after graduation, I sat in my small office at the community center. The walls weren't lined with degrees, but with drawings from children in our groups. My work had become my life, not as escape, but as true fulfillment. One afternoon, a familiar figure appeared quietly in my doorway. Melissa. She said she applied for outreach coordinator, wanting work that truly mattered. We spoke for an hour about evidence-based practices and community needs. She didn't get the position, but she carried the rejection with quiet grace. As she left, she said he'd be proud of me. I looked around at the files, each one a life in transition. The journey had been brutal, the path scattered with wreckage from my old life. I used pain as fuel, betrayal as lesson, and inheritance as a tool. My future isn't a reaction to the past, it's a hopeful creation authored by me.